once again to our Thursday speaker series. So pleased to see you all here tonight. My name is Julia Chambers, for the three people that I haven't met yet. It's wonderful to see you all. I'm the executive director, and it's my privilege to introduce our speaker for this evening. Before I do that, though, I have a public service message from Pat Hart about our wonderful new docent program.
Good evening. I wanted to let you know that we are starting our next series of docent training. We just finished with one group, and we have 7 brand new docents at the museum who are extraordinarily excited about being with us. We have so many people interested in being docents for the next training class that we have 2 schedules set up. You can either come on a Tuesday morning for training or a Sunday morning. So I have these pages printed out for you to show you the dates, and I have the cards to get all of your information. Would all of the people who are currently in our friendly docent group raise your hand? So there is someone sitting next to you who can tell you what a joy it is to be one of us. So hopefully every single one of you, before you leave here tonight, will fill out one of these cards for me. Okay? Thank you.
We do have the most wonderful docent community here, and nothing here would happen without them. So I'm very thankful, and it is a lot of fun to go through the class and the training. So tonight, without further ado, I am so pleased to welcome Travers Newton Jr., who will be speaking about the history of Hueneme and Channel Islands harbors, and also giving a tribute to historian and wonderful friend of the museum, Powell Greenland. Who just passed away a couple of months ago. And so tonight we are understanding of the history of Ventura County, particularly the evolution of Hueneme and the Channel Islands harbors will be expanded. And also, I just realized this, but I understand that we would like to, anyone who would like to come up after the talk and share their memories of Powell are also welcome to do so. Is that right? Wonderful. So it might be a wonderful time to do that. Henry Travers Newton Jr. I was just so impressed reading over this resume, which is about 12 pages long, and I won't read through the whole thing, but he is working in the fields of art conservation, exhibitions, research, attribution, publications, and international transportation. So maybe that'll be a question from the audience exactly what that is, but these are all wonderful things. And I wanted to just mention a few of the jobs he's held: a visiting conservator at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and conservation at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and at the Santa Barbara Museum, right here in California, the Museum of Art in Sao Paulo, Brazil. He's also worked at the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, and had some significant work on the Leonardo da Vinci Last Supper mural, which I believe everyone is familiar with. Publications, his writing includes writing on the topics of Van Gogh, art confiscated in France by the Nazis in World War II. Richard Bard, of course, you can imagine, and also Thomas R. Bard are among his topics. Paul Gauguin, Frederick Church. It's wonderful to have such an impressive scholar, writer, artist, conservator in the room with us, and I do look forward to hearing what he has to say on our topic tonight. So please join me in welcoming Travers Newton.
For those kind words, and thank you, Maritime Museum, for having me tonight. It's actually kind of intimidating for me because Powell was such a big figure in our family and such a great historian. So I don't feel up to paying tribute to him, but this is a start, and thank you for that. And I know there are many friends in the audience. And also my mother is here, and she's the family archivist, so she's probably going to see points that I don't get right. And my sister Georgia worked with Powell for many years on research on Hueneme Harbor, so we've got some experts. So if anybody wants to comment or make a suggestion during this brief talk, please let me know, and you're welcome afterwards to share memories of Powell. You probably know the reason his tie with Port Hueneme is that he's trained in the Merchant Marine in World War II. It wasn't all Navy at Port Hueneme. They also had a training center here. And so I thought it was interesting when he finished his business career that he wanted to come back here. After he wanted to start out as a teacher, but he got into business, successful business career, and in retirement returned to his love of history and published numerous books, including this one on hydraulic mining, gold mining in California. This museum helped him publish 2 books. This one, the first, as Carol Marsh points out, first serious history of Port Hueneme. His wife, Billy, couldn't make it tonight. Sends her greetings to the museum. And then this museum also helped him publish the Maritime Legacy of Ventura County, dedicated to Richard Bard. And my mother is the eldest of Richard Bard's 5 children, and we're extremely dedicated to Powell for preserving the memory of Joanna's father and her grandfather. He went through boxes of archives that my mother's brother Archie gave to the Oxnard Harbor District, and Bill Bunker cared for them, and Powell was able to go through them and make sense of them into this very well-researched history of the building of the harbor. He published numerous other studies like this on Thomas Bard and his house in Barrowwood. And the library here owns, I think, the best collection of these self-published articles, and we were discussing tonight about the issue of speaking with Billy about copyright, whether they could be reprinted for the benefit of this museum. And my sister Georgia worked with Powell on the book on Richard Bard's harbor and his efforts to build the harbor, and she and Powell put together this DVD and on the history of building the harbor, and Powell was the narrator. And I think what's wonderful is Georgia had him as the narrator, so we have his voice. And when we went to Powell's memorial, she mentioned that to his daughters, and they didn't know about that. They said, "That's wonderful. We don't have any recordings of our father's distinctive voice, so it's preserved." Powell also was a board member of the Museum Ventura County and a reader for their journal. And he wrote about the Hueneme Lighthouse, built in 1874. We'll return to this, but by a distinctive naval architect. And it's just wonderfully researched article. He wrote about historic wharves and landings in California's Central Coast. And his last publication, this is our quarterly publication of the Friends of the Bard House, which is on the Navy base, Fort Hueneme. And we wanted to invite Sherry Brandt, who wrote the book on the history of this harbor, And I wrote to Powell and I asked him, could you please write something about Richard Barnes' involvement with that harbor? And as usual, he came through with a 2-page synopsis, and we published it in our newsletter. Well, I'd like to try to build on Powell's book on the history of Hueneme Harbor and start with an image that he published. And this is the first survey of the Hueneme Canyon. And the insert shows the Hueneme Lagoon, and this was made in 1857 by a U.S. survey party, which was largely, from my understanding, sent out because of gold and minerals and possible sites that could be advantage to the U.S. But he made soundings and found that the canyon, the Hueneme Canyon, went down to 1,000 feet. And this is important because Thomas Bard met him and he took him to this site. Greenwell had 3 artists with him on this survey, and here are the 2 Knoll brothers painting their survey camp, Site Unknown, collection in Santa Barbara, historical. And here is another artist, again the survey party, Site Unknown, but those mountains remind me of the hills behind, maybe with some exaggeration, behind Magoo, where Jack Broome had his ranch. Well, Bard, his city, his town in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, was burned during the Civil War. He and his brother were in the north. And Bard was a railroad man, and he knew how to ride a horse and send telegraph messages. So Joanna still has a diary where he said, I think I see rebel troops coming near Gettysburg, so he could shimmy up a telegraph pole and send that message. Thomas Scott was head of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and Bard came to his attention as an able scout. Scott also employed Andrew Carnegie because in those days, knowledge of how to use a telegraph was actually very rare. And he was also a train dispatcher. And he had dinner, Thomas had dinner with Scott Carnegie the day before he was sent to California. This is a military railroad. There was also military telegraph in the Civil War. And Thomas was part of this, and he and his brother Cephas were both in battles of Gettysburg and Antietam. So Thomas was sent to, by Scott. He and Carnegie had early oil interests in Titusville, where oil was discovered. And he sent Bard there, Joanna Scott diaries, visiting Titusville in the fall of '64, and he was sailed to San Francisco in December and arrived early January with the job of taking care of Scott's land in California. In Ventura County, he owned about 200,000 acres, and he was planning to have a railroad come from Texas to possibly Port Hueneme through the Santa Clara River Valley. So his other job was to prospect for oil, survey and prospecting. His brother, Dr. Cephas Bard, followed 2 years later, and I didn't put up the slide, but when he died in 1903, 5,000 people showed up when Ventura had a population of 3,000. They donated Bard Hospital, and if a patient couldn't pay, he would ask for a basket, or he was friends with the Chumash, or a pair of spurs, saddle, and he was the founder of the Ventura Museum. So in 1865, Bard needed a home, and Scott's Petroleum Company built this kind of Swiss chalet on the side of Sulphur Mountain. And he prospected for oil, and he hit a gusher near the Cesar Creek, if you know the road that goes from Santa Paula to Ojai, in 1867. And he and his brother Cephas lived here until 71, when he moved to Hueneme. Well, the oil market, okay, Noah.
Is there any remains of that first house there in Sulphur?
No, we'd love to find them, see if there's a foundation.
Nobody's found anything?
No. He describes it as being above the Arnez adobe, so if you know where that, you know, they used to have a fruit stand. Don's with the Ventura County Heritage Board and knowledgeable, cultural, right. No, but I think that, I mean, just finding the pad, I think, unless it's been bulldozed. But I'd like to know that. I'd like to do that. So right after the Civil War, the market for oil bottomed out, and Scott lost the race for the Transcontinental Railroad to Collis Huntington. So he turned to agriculture, and part of Scott's concept was if he built a railroad to Ventura, to Hueneme, one needed to ship goods by, mostly they were going to San Francisco because there wasn't a market in Los Angeles. And so he said, well, let's continue with that concept and build the wharf next to that deep sea underwater canyon. And he used the same technology that he was using for oil to drive the redwood piles into the sand, boring with steel and steam. And the redwood logs were lighter down from San Francisco. And you see these are, they have probably grain, and they have tracks, horses who pull it to the ship. And there's a wreck of a ship there. And this is very important, this building, because this was part of the Hueneme Wharf and Warehouse Company that we'll return to. Thomas's company had a ship called the Hueneme, and we've never found a photo of it. But I wonder if that could be it. We don't know who the photographer was. She would take seeds out to Justinian Care in Santa Cruz Island and come back with cattle, and she went aground in Alaska. Don't know why she went up there. So this is a street in Hueneme, and hauling goods to the wharf. And sort of Dean Carpenter is on our board. A long-time Hueneme resident pointed out you needed wide streets in Hueneme because a lot of these are 6-horse teams, and the turnaround is very difficult. See the size of that wagon there, sacks.
That's a great point.
So they were, this is 1895, but they were growing. This is the Bard's Hueneme Wharf and Warehouse Company, office and staff right near the wharf. And you probably know of the Bank of A. Levy. And Levy got a start. Bard had a bank in Hueneme, and it was basically holding money that was, they would purchase crops, hold the money there, and then he'd ride into Ventura to pay the staff at night. His wife wrote, she was worried. He was riding with all these gold coins, but Levy was shrewd. He came from Alsace-Lorraine, and my take on him is that he was a early commodities broker. And what I've read is he would see a shipment, let's say, of grain on the wharf, and he had telegraphs. So he would telegraph San Francisco and say, how much is grain going for? And then he'd figure out how much it cost to ship, and then he'd buy it. And that's part of it. It's key to his business, communication. So Thomas built this home in Port Hueneme. We believe it's the site of the Bard house now. Don't know who the architect was, but it looks like it could have been a kit, let's say. I don't know what Don would say about that, but it looks to me like architect design. And then in 1876, he married Mary Gerberding, who lived in San Francisco, moved to Hueneme, not terribly happy to be in such an isolated place. Mary had children. The first child, Robert, died after 1 year. And this is in the order, and that's my grandfather, Richard. So they needed larger quarters. So in 1895, they built this Victorian home. And you see the garden growing because it was a working ranch as well. And Thomas was very interested in horticulture. He'd get seeds from ship captains who traveled all around the world, and he'd try out different plants, partly as crops, but also partly as exotic specimens. You see, here's a postcard with this is the 1912 house designed by Myron Hunt with these lush gardens. This I've always thought is very odd because Myron Hunt designed the Huntington residence, the Huntington Museum, at the same time, and that was his patron, Mr. Scott's nemesis, because of the railroad. There's Thomas he was knowledgeable about plants and bred his own rose. I didn't show you that Georgia worked with Laurie Hanna, the librarian of the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, where the Bard papers are on the garden. And the Ventura Museum published a journal about the garden, which we hope someday to restore. Charles Johnson helped me with photos, and I find this very interesting. Charles from the Ventura Museum, because there is the formal sort of diplomatic, they call it Bard Mansion. My mother grew up next to it. She hates that term. Call it the Bard home. It's so pretentious. But this shows that this is a later photo when things are falling apart. But I think if my mother will correct me, I'd see this as a dairy barn.
Yes.
A working dairy barn. And so, and then this, I don't know. We have other photos. The milk house. Okay, thank you. Carol Marsh is the archivist of the Navy base Ventura.
Oh,
Was. So it's, in a way, I wonder, are they almost trying to somehow distance themselves from their roots as farming people and become more sort of diplomats? I don't know how to read this, but I do find it interesting that is it a society issue, or is it just becoming older, or is it because he was a senator? I don't know. I think it's curious, and it is a beautiful barn, I think, and it's too bad it was torn down. So, grandfather was at Princeton, class of 1915, when his father died. He was a history major, and he was accepted to Harvard Law School, and he was also thinking of becoming a missionary. He was always a deeply religious man, very honest, and I think embarrassed about the family wealth and power. But he was called to take over the reins of his father's business, the Barrelwood Investment Company. Barrelwood, this estate, was named after his daughter Beryl. Sorry, having a little trouble working this. So he married Joan Boyd, who grew up in an olive ranch in Los Olivos, and my mother's just finished a book about her, and brought her to Hueneme, and the next year shipped out to France in World War I. There they are in front of the Bard House. And that's Richard again, full of optimism with his mother and father-in-law. And you know something, I have dear friends in Paris, and the father was in his father was in World War I in the French army, and he got the Legion of Honor. And his son said to me, who died recently, he said, you know something? The Americans never made any difference in World War I. My reading is, yes, we did. We closed it down. So, you know, he might have not come back. My mother wouldn't be here if he didn't. There's my mother with Richard back from World War I, and her mother in front of they call it the big house. This is the house where my mother grew up, and we're going to go with Don and Wayne for a tour. It was designed by Reginald Shand, who was Myron Hunt's assistant on the big house, and also a relative by marriage. And we want to take our mother, her memories. For example, she was the first in the house, so her bedroom was here. And then when her her sister Kitty was born, they had to share one bathroom, and they didn't get along. And even though she was the big sister, they built this dormer and put her in a tiny little bedroom up there. So this is an aerial of the Bard Wharf, Thomas Bard, with the Hueneme Wharf and warehouse, and there see a train track there that would bring the goods out. And this, I believe, is the Ventura Bakersfield Railway here, which my mother can remember riding her horse Peggy across the slough, over the tracks, and down to the beach. That's the site of what will become the Hueneme Harbor. So there's the Bard Wharf and the warehouses there, Bard House there, and this is what's going to become Hueneme Harbor, and of course Channel Islands will be over here. (1874) map to orient us. Hueneme Wharf Company. That's the design of Hueneme that Thomas Bard laid out to notice Scott Street in memory of his patron. The lighthouse we're going to see soon. So contemporary map of Hueneme Canyon, ancient geological formation due to the river, and it goes down to about 1,000 feet. So a debate in the family is whether Thomas envisioned a harbor. And I think a reason that he might have is he bought a lot of the slough, the Hueneme Slough, just before he died. So Richard in the 20s proposed the concept of a harbor there, and it ensued a legal battle for years because Ventura said, no, we want it at the mouth of the Ventura River. And this is in Mother's archive. They're suing the Board of Supervisors, and they wanted to put up to a vote, a county vote, which was declared unconstitutional. So then, how to fund the Hueneme Harbor? Well, Richard went to President Roosevelt and Secretary of the Interior Ickes because of the Depression. They had set up the Public Works Program. And in 1933, President Roosevelt granted a loan to the Hueneme Harbor. It was then the Hueneme Wharf and Dock Corporation. So a year later, you see, and Richard was a Republican, and Ickes, they did good things, but they treated him very shabbily. This man kept Richard waiting for a month in his office till he'd see him, and that's the type of treatment he got. So Richard wrote a 6-page letter to FDR protesting it because FDR had signed the contract. And my reading is of this history, and this is just a work in progress, is the public works ran through billions of dollars very quickly. And I don't know how they chose projects. I mean, Eleanor got involved. They were mainly in New York City and the Mississippi. And I don't know if it was politically motivated or maybe they didn't have enough votes out here. But they, as far as I can tell, FDR or Ickes never responded to this letter. And thanks to this talk tonight, you've kindled some fires to do some research in this area. So I just wanted to give you that detail that how Richard wrote that FDR approved the project in 1933, and that's a document I'd like to get. The FDR archives say they have no knowledge of it. So what would Richard do? He's accused of profiteering, of ripping off the government. So he deeds the land. First he offered it to Ventura. They didn't want it, so he turned to Oxnard. So that's where it went. There's the first shovelful. Mother's there are 2 children. She's the eldest, and this is Margaret, the youngest. She lives in Mendocino. There she is at the groundbreaking. This was the Bard Beach House in Padero Lane in Santa Barbara, and I put this in because of harbor design. It was washed away in '39 without any compensation, thanks to Max Fleischmann's terrible design of the Santa Barbara harbor. I had a class in oceanography, and this is an example of the worst possible design because they didn't have a model, and that dredger is there all year round, and I'd like to know who's paying for it. So here they're starting the dredging of Hueneme Slough. This was The land was deeded by Bard. He paid for the engineering, and Oxnard, the people in the Oxnard Harbor District raised a $1.7 million bond. There's the lighthouse, piles for the wharf, jetty going in. They moved the lighthouse to save it, Don, to preserve it, 1874. And you know something?
That's from the pictures.
It got dismantled by the Navy. There's,
What a shame.
from what I read, is remnants of Bard's Wharf and the Winnie Dock and warehouse, and I believe those are, maybe Carol could correct me, Navy buildings.
Okay, as much as I can see, that may be the Maritime Training School.
That's what Powell was talking about.
Yes,
Yeah.
it only unfortunately graduated one class. It was a one-year course, and they opened in the fall of 1941. But then, of course, in December came Pearl Harbor, and the Navy came in, and it won the harbor. So it condemned the harbor district and 1,500 acres of land, mainly to the north of the harbor, for a naval base. And the Maritime Academy School was on the property the Navy condemned. So it became a Navy administration building as of the spring of '42, and the Maritime School had to move.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. We'll add that. Need to interview you. So the Winnie Harbor invited a wire of greeting to FDR for their opening. And I was speaking with Bill Bunker tonight because he preserved the archives of the Winnie Harbor that Joanna's brother Archie gave to the Oxnard Harbor District, given back to Joanna in her archive. And I had about 15 minutes to go through them when preparing for this talk, and I grabbed a file on FDR and then one on endorsements, and I pulled out a telegram from Wendell Wilkie, and I said, that name sounds familiar. And there he is. And that was the first telegram of congratulations. And here it is. And Wilkie was the Republican candidate running against FDR. And remember, it was wartime, but I happened to be a Democrat, but there were also serious concerns in the United States about Roosevelt having a third term. What were his intentions? And Wilkie made the effort to come out here and inspect the harbor, and he terms Richard Bard my good friend. So the next day, Roosevelt writes, and I do admire him, but some people, you know, we all have feet of clay. He salutes the community of Oxnard out of their own financial resources to create Winnie Harbor. So at least there's a slight reference that remembering that Ickes turned down the loan, but there's no mention of Bard, and I don't want to read too much in here, but I think there's some partisanship going on. Okay, now a little naval history. Chuck was in the South Pacific, World War II. And this is a meeting with Navy Secretary Knox, which we're going to go to because he wrote about Winnie Harbor. And the man on the right is Admiral Richardson, and he, in 40, was against basing all our fleet in Pearl Harbor. He thought we weren't up to a battle and it would antagonize the Japanese and that we were sitting ducks on top of it. Knox, by the way, there's the secretary. He had been with Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, but no naval training. He was a newspaper man. So we all know the sad story about Pearl Harbor. And that was, remember, under Knox and FDR. So, FDR appoints James Forrestal, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a banker. And he was really able at building up the Navy. He's here in front of the map because we had very little naval presence on this side. All we saw was Europe. And he was a classmate of Richard at Princeton. And he's the one who took over the Hueneme Harbor. Richard wanted it to be leased and not taken by the Navy. And you'll see he crosses out, "Dear Mr. Bard, Dick," and signs it Forrestal, not James. And I want to explore this. He was a very capable man, but he was a troubled person. He resented the sons at Princeton of rich and powerful, and he came from very modest means. So there's Richard, the son of a senator and a wealthy man. He used those connections. Brilliant building up the Navy, but after the war killed himself. Very troubled, and his wife suffered from schizophrenia. So I'm also interested in the psychology of people and their motives. So here you see Secretary of the Navy, stamped Frank Knox, and Richard, let's see. Richard had written asking that the Navy lease and not take, and it went through Elliott, I believe a senator representing California, again saying he said we would buy the property rather than lease it. So this became one of the most important ports in World War II. You had railway, and as people have pointed out, even today, commercially, ships can get in and out, get to sea really quickly, whereas in the big harbors, they have to wait weeks. And this helped us defeat the Japanese. So Richard, once again, somehow pulls the strings, age 53, get into military government when the limit was 45. And he served in Germany during combat. And our upcoming talk is going to be about his work with the monuments men and finding German art in mines. He's gone for 3 years, and we think Joanna's mother was alone in the Bard house for a couple of those years. His two sons, Archie and Dick, served in the Air Force. And his wife, Joan, had to move out of the Bard house, and fortunately the Mackenzie house had been built by the Barrelwood Investment Company for the head of the Harper District. We don't know what happened to Mackenzie, but Joan moved in there, and there's the children, there's my mother, and Joan is hiding behind. This is after the war, because Archie had returned from the Aleutian campaign. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's a slow battery. So when Richard returned in 46, there was flooding in Hueneme. He realized it was caused by the jetties of Hueneme Harbor trapping sand that normally had moved southward. And I have this on good account that the Navy added to the length of the jetties so they could bring in bigger ships, and that contributed to the problem of flooding, the sand going into that deep canyon. So Richard was appointed supervisor of Ventura County in '46 by Governor Earl Warren, and he went to work how to rectify the situation. They met with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they said, if you build a harbor, this harbor, not for pleasure craft, not for million-dollar homes, but as a sand trap to slow the southern migration of sand, this is going to help Hueneme Beach. So Richard went to work. He went through Congress, Eisenhower, and he was to get federal funding. They said, okay, we're going to do it. But Eisenhower dragged his feet because of the war in Korea. So to sweeten the deal, once again, Richard offered to donate land owned by the Barrelwood Investment Company. McGrath kicked in that. And they said, okay. Dredging started. Government kicked in $5.5 million. And at the 65 opening, this is Richard Smalley of the Ventura Star wrote, Richard dedicated the harbor, fathering two great harbors, May 30th, 1965. Smalley was sent to interview Richard in '64, and I recently found this in the Foster Library, and it's very interesting because it must be words from Richard, and I don't think he resented it, but he said the Bard estate was sold for the Navy for $150,000, property that was worth millions. Well, the Navy appraised it. Powell had the nerve in our newsletter to dig out the quote from Richard, 1961, a letter he found, which I hadn't found myself, but he protested to the supervisors their decision to hand over the destiny of Channel Islands Harbor to private control and exploitation. Now, I know I'm on shaky ground here because Bud Smith Foundation is next door. Colleen Kasem said to me, the reporter from the Star said, you can't print that in your newsletter. You mean to say I can't print what my grandfather wrote? And I also realize that the Nelson Foundation are your benefactors. But I gotta call a spade a spade. And we've invited Mrs. Nelson and Julia to come to the Bard House and give a talk about this wonderful collection, because Richard Bard had a hand in making those men very wealthy. So there's an aerial of the relationship of the two harbors. Very unique, I think, any place in the world. And this harbor didn't stop what the Army Corps of Engineers said it would. The erosion continues in Hueneme. We've got a little sense of responsibility, so we invited Julia Brownlee, who, not partisan, but she went to President Obama and she said #1 on her list was getting money to replenish Hueneme Beach. She got the $12 million, so Joanna celebrated her for doing that. Supervisor Zaragoza came, and his #1 man is here tonight, Bill Gallagher, and we want to thank them for their good work. We just don't know if a redesign is needed. We're looking into that. We're trying to talk. I'm not a harbor expert, but trying to educate myself. This is at the Barn House. Last slide. Thank you for putting up with me, and I want to invite you to our dinner on July 7th, which will be a June, sorry, thank you. Yeah, to Powell, we're going to have anybody from the Maritime Museum like to come. Powell was president of the Southern California Historical Society, which is in the Charles Lummis House. The current and past director are coming. Museum of Ventura County. And I want to thank you all, and if anybody has anything they'd like to say, I invite you to the podium. Thank you for having me. Was it okay?
We all stayed. It was wonderful. Could we have another round of applause, please? And indeed, if after that wonderful background and all education and quotes are knowledge for us, and let's continue to develop the story and you know, whatever we can. But tonight is also about Powell Greenland too, and I think that was such a lovely. I learned so much tonight, which is always a pleasure, and just thank you so much for everything you researched. And oh my goodness. But would anyone else like to come up and share their memories? This is a wonderful venue to remember Powell or share their thoughts. I know there's several occasions, and the service was there, but anyone? Bill? Bill Conlon.
For those of you who never met Powell, I imagine not many in this room, but you missed an opportunity. Powell was a really serious guy. He was a great friend, but he was very serious. When he had a thing to do, that was what was going to be done. He really jumped in and took care of things. I had the opportunity, well, I started the museum in '99, and Powell was on the board. I don't know if he was the president then, but he probably was. And at that point, board members were invited to come to the monthly meeting of the volunteers. Powell was the guy that came. And that's the first time I saw Powell. Oh, there's a board member over there. It was really interesting. And as years went by, I talked to Powell more and more. And he and I were on a committee to try to increase membership. He was very serious about it. We didn't do very well, I think, but we really tried hard, as would always be Powell's method. Paul was a great friend. I could rely on him, I could call him, ask him for advice about the museum, what do you think we should do next, that sort of thing. And I was here one that, when I realized he was such a friend, and this is kind of a funny thing, but you know there are scams out there on the internet nowadays. And at one point, somebody hacked in the museum to my email address and sent out a message saying that I was stuck in London and couldn't get home because I didn't have any money and all that. You've all seen those things. Well, Powell and I had discussions about England. Powell's brother and I have an interest in English pubs, it turns out. So we've discussed that many times. Well, people called me right away. I got a dozen calls saying, no, I'm not in London, don't worry about it. but Powell didn't call me. About 2 days later, I saw Powell here in the museum, well, the old museum. He said, "What are you doing here? I thought you were in London." "I've been going to the bank trying to get you some money." It was wonderful. But that's the kind of friend he was. Okay. You know, I can't answer that. I don't know. He was very early on,
Yeah.
but I don't know if he was one of the very beginnings.
Anyone else? Well, that's perfect. I started here about 9 months ago, and Powell came to the first few board meetings that I was at, and he was a quiet presence, and everybody said that he used to just dominate the meetings, and he was the president of the board for a very long time, right up here when they met over there, and it was just wonderful to hear these stories. So for someone who only got to meet him a few times, this is really wonderful to have this history for someone who's so important to our museum. So thank you. So if anyone wants to, I'm sure we'll chat about Powell, but this is our Thursday speaker series, and next month's speaker, I don't know if he's still here, Glenn Henning. He was here. So next month, Thursday, June 19, Glenn Henning is going to present The First Surfers, Ancient Maritime Cultures of Peru, which we are really looking forward to. So spread the word. It's going to be wonderful. Yeah, he must have gone to prepare his talk. But all of our events are sponsored by Union Bank. We're very fortunate. But please come and see this one especially. And then we are going to be doing an exhibit on, I think he might actually be bringing this reed boat with him. So that's another fun thing to get to see. But we're going to be doing a museum exhibit in collaboration with the other maritime museums down the coast, the four of us, in 2015. So that's something to look forward to. And just to wet your whistle and tempt you a little bit, so Glenn's coming on June 19th. July 17th, we'll have Alan Kemp, the historian who's talking about Sacred Expedition, Alta California Colonial Maritime History. And that'll be July 17th. Following him in August, Patrick Smith, talking about California shipwrecks and man-made reefs. Boy, this is really exotic. We have a very exotic summer and fall coming up because on September 18th, Ken McAlpine, is an author, and he's researching the moon cutters and early rescues. So, batten down the hatches. And then October 16th, John Johnston from the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, the history of the Chumash, which is next few times you come, hopefully by next month, we'll have our Port Hueneme exhibit over here in the corner. At least the next time, if not by next month, certainly the month after. That will be done. It's sponsored by the port and other entities. And then also we're going to be developing our Chumash exhibit and Channel Islands with navigation. So we're really going to be following our mission of turning this into an interactive upper deck space, which really teaches us about this wonderful environment in which we're so lucky to live. And then our final talk, November 20th, will be Brian Fagan, and this might be my favorite title. He's an author and historian. His title is Fish on Friday, How Eating Fish on Holy Days Changed History. So you have to come for that one for sure. So we welcome you tonight. We look forward to welcoming you many nights in the future. We're so glad that you all came, and please stay and chat, and what a wonderful talk this evening. Thank you again.